Okay, today we're going to talk about real stuff. And that shows how desperate I am for a title, because I was trying to come up with some kind of clever take on real, not fake, but we'll just talk about real stuff today. Not like we don't do it all the time. I don't take that, interpret it that way. We talk about all the convergence of events. So I've been gone. I was gone last week. I spoke a few times in Denver at the One of Messiah Convocation. I think those videos will be up in the next couple
weeks.
I also spoke last Sunday. I posted my prophecy update that I did at Longmont, Colorado, Candlelight Christian Fellowship. And I spoke yesterday at the Go Therefore conference in Lima, Ohio. I'm not sure if or when that's going to be put up. I know there was a live stream, but you had to pay to access it. You might just keep looking for that. I'm going to repeat some of the stuff that I did here today. I only had 40 minutes to speak in Lima, and as you know, I have trouble clearing my throat in 40 minutes. So, and I don't need any comments from the peanut gallery back. You guys, you concentrate of the rest. We all have our role to play around here, and peanut gallery comments are not it. So let's, a world disrupted. So let's just look at some of the things. I'll talk a lot about the Middle East, and I'll talk about some cultural things first. This is, why we should like Facebook's cryptocurrency. This is what was in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. I'm not sure we should like it. I don't know. I just don't trust these people. And you'll see some reasons why in just a moment. In fact, I don't even have I didn't put the video in. I didn't even put a slide in. So I'll just talk about it right now. Well, let's do this one first. The mosquitoes are coming for us. This was in the New York Times this morning in the review section. And it said that there's probably at least 100 trillion mosquitoes on the planet, that 700,000 people die from mosquito-related illnesses, diseases every year. So it's okay to kill them and swat them. And so it's just something, and I think this is an example. I mean, we saw the pictures. I mean, I'm sure some of you saw the pictures of the locusts descending on Las Vegas this week. Maybe they thought they were having a convention there. I don't know. There's a lot of convention space in Las Vegas. But there's all these different things, and having been sick a little bit over the last few weeks with an infection, there's a lot of things out there that can get you. And we know that the scripture, the Bible, prophesies that in any times that these pestilences will increase. And at some point, they'll have a tremendous impact on humanity. I think they already are. I'm also going to talk a little bit today about what I didn't have time to get into as much yesterday as I wanted, demographics, because I think this is an important part of all of our little end time scenarios that we sometimes forget. This is a new cover from The Economist, The Global Crisis in Conservatism. And the answer, it's always interesting when a sort of, I would call it a center-left, the left publication like The Economist criticizes conservatism, because I don't think they really understand it. But one of the things that's led to this is the ascension to power this week of a new prime minister in Britain, Boris Johnson. And some people are happy, some people are sad. He says, we're doing Brexit whether you like it or not. He sacked a lot of people in the cabinet. That was not a very popular move with a lot of people. I don't even know if I was looking to see if I put a slide in for that. I didn't, so I'll just talk about it now. And he said, we're going to do Brexit. And a lot of people are comparing him to Donald Trump. His personal life is a bit of a mess. But he essentially got rid of almost everybody in the cabinet that Theresa May had. So we'll see how that goes. Jeremy Corbyn was saying this morning, well, he's going to be subject to a no confidence vote pretty soon. And I wish somebody would subject Jeremy Corbyn to a non-confidence vote for all the anti-Semitism that he's fostered in the Labor Party over the years. But this is a great article yesterday. It's a debate between two people, David French. Is American religious liberty in peril? David French, who writes at National Review, who's not a supporter of the president, by the way, he says, yeah, this is a problem. This started with Obergefell. The question was asked directly to the attorney on the same-sex marriage, pro-same-sex marriage side. And he said, well, yeah, you know, this could happen because people are going to, people need to behave. That conservative Christians, they just can't do anything they want. They just can't practice their religion as they want. So the yes from David French says, today's administrative state is on a collision course with traditional religious communities, and the key battleground is sexual morality. And I think that's an entirely accurate statement by David French. Marcy Hamilton, who wrote, No, there's no threat to American religious liberty, she said this: the First Amendment doesn't exempt believers from general laws for the public good, especially when their conduct harms others. Now, I have to ask a question. Did she ever read the First Amendment? Congress shall make no law, and it's applied to the states through the 14th Amendment. Congress shall make no law. Now, I'm a lawyer, and when I see the phrase shall make no law, it means, this is a very technical legal term, it means shall make no law. And it says, you know, abridging freedom of religion, establishing freedom of religion, or preventing the free exercise thereof. And so if your laws are preventing the free exercise of religion for people to act in accordance with their religious principles, it seems like it's a pretty simple calculus. But when I see statements like this from somebody like Marcy Hamilton, my first thought is, where did you get your advanced degree? What college did you get your advanced degree from? Because you had to have common sense and the ability to read simple English beaten out of you at some point. And she has. So it's a great article. You can find that in the Wall Street Journal. This was a very kind of troubling article to me. Now, first of all, Mariano Rivera was a New York Yankee. He is the greatest relief pitcher of all time. He was phenomenal. He retired 4 or 5 years ago, and he was elected to the Hall of Fame. He was the first baseball player ever elected to the Hall of Fame unanimously. Nobody didn't vote for him. So last week, he was inducted last Sunday. And so here we come with an article from the Daily Beast. Now, we don't have high expectations for articles from the Daily Beast, written by a guy named Silverman. And he just says, inside Baseball Hall of Famer Mariano Rivera's far-right politics. And the article is a diatribe against Mariano Rivera, who has committed, apparently, atrocities in the view of the author of this article, so much so that he says they need to note this on his plaque at Cooperstown at least. Now, I don't know how many other plaques have anything about the person's politics. And we know there's baseball players that don't have very good moral reputations. He is an evangelical Christian, and that's one of his big sins. He does support the president, and he also has been to Israel a few times, and he supports the IDF. And so for these public sins, essentially what he says is he shouldn't even be allowed in the Hall of Fame. And this is what the left is doing. This is the direction that they're going. Now, a lot of this, I think, comes from, I think it's a fulfillment of prophecy. Now, the Spirit, 1 Timothy chapter 4, speaketh expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron. Now, this is always a big controversy. I'm going to use one example today in a little bit. What does it mean depart from the faith? I think the simple interpretation of that is, can you depart from the faith? I mean, how do you depart from something that you're never really in? That's just my view. Now, that gets into a whole big debate, and I'm not really interested in having that debate. I'm just telling you, this is what the scripture accurately says. Some shall depart from the faith. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, a similar theme is carried out. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables. And we see this, we could couple in Romans chapter 1, and God gives them over to a reprobate mind, which means that they get to a point where they're no longer able to reason. You see this all the time. Now, this week, Attorney General Barr said that he was going to reinstate the death penalty in the federal system. Nobody's been executed for a dozen years, and the Obama administration put a strict moratorium on it. And so Attorney General Barr says we're going to start executions of people who've been found guilty, usually pretty serious, horrible killings that they've done. And of course, everybody's upset. So here, Cardinal Kupich on his Twitter account says this: today, Attorney General William Barr announced he was reversing a moratorium on the federal death penalty. This decision is gravely injurious to the common good, as it effaces the God-given dignity of all human beings, even those who have committed terrible crimes. Boy, that's, I think I didn't. I thought I pulled my mic out. No luck, if that's what you were hoping for. Alyssa Milano, the great Hollywood philosopher and political commentator, who spends her career pretending to be somebody else for money, said this: your administration just reinstated the death penalty and scheduled 5 executions of actual people. You've lost the right to pull your pro-life narrative talking points expletive with me. Somebody responded, murdered like Planned Parenthood? Murdered like that? Is that what you mean? Which I think is a good response. And so, but this is the type of back and forth that we have in our culture now. This is never going away, absent a massive revival or the return of Jesus. So I know the return of Jesus is coming, so we'll go away then. But until then, we're going to be in this society and culture where there's a lot of division. Now, this week, we had the Mueller, I don't know if I would call it Mueller testimony at before Congress and the Senate, House and the Senate, and he didn't do very well. So the kindest thing you can say is, I hope he's losing his mind. You could say he's lost his mind. Or the other one, my view is, I don't really think he was running anything. I think he was a figurehead, and they appointed a bunch of Democratic lawyer operatives. It's clear who these people were to do this. And for this man to sit there and act like he doesn't know what Fusion GPS is just appalling. I guess you don't get much for the $30 million you pay these lawyers to do things anymore if the head of the investigation doesn't even know who this is and the genesis of all of this stuff. So you're going to see lots of fighting back and forth about that. Again, this is something that's not going away. And I saw some of the Democratic representatives, Jerry Nadler and others, and they just came out, they flat out lied about what Mueller said in the hearing. I mean, it's demonstrably false. And they're trying to create this narrative. It's not going away. This is a story. You can read in Isaiah chapter 24 that God affects the weather. And part of this affecting the weather is an end-time judgment. Now, we can argue about climate change and that type of thing. But I can tell you the title of my talk in Lima yesterday was Unprecedented Convergence. I've used that title here before. because I decided on the title. I sat there in the audience, and Carl Gallups got up, and he talked about all this unprecedented convergence that's going on about 4 or 5 times. And I went up and I told him, I said, I think you owe me $25 for every time you mention convergence, because that's part of my talk. But I hadn't told him the rules in advance. So, but it's true that you see these stories all the time. Unprecedented convergence. We've never seen anything like this. I've talked about swine Ebola in China and Asia. That problem continues to grow. Contaminated feed lasts for a long time. China's now buying, I think, there's just an agreement announced, or they've allowed people to buy corn and feeder pigs and that type of thing from the United States. That hasn't happened. They've lost probably upwards of half or more of their crop of their herds. Well, is pigs a herd? They've lost most of their pigs. Let's just put it that way. And this is going to have a huge impact. It'll affect market for corn and feed corn and that type of thing. Driving up to Lima yesterday, I again was shocked at the number of fields that were not even planted this year. I've never seen anything like this in my life. And some of the fields that were planted, I have to tell you, they don't look that good. And Ohio's one of the most important agricultural states in the country, so this is going to have an impact down the road. At the same time all that's going on, they're having all-time record temperatures in Europe, 108 degrees in Paris, 101 degrees in England, the second highest temperature ever recorded. Europe itself is in a drought in many areas. It's my understanding that there is a barley shortage to the point where Germans aren't able to make the beer that they usually make. So, but this has an economic impact to it. I mean, what are all the race cars going to do if they can't make beer, and sell beer and get money to sponsor race cars? So this is a problem. And again, it's time and time again, we see these things, and always in the article, look for things that say, this is unprecedented. This has never happened. And so I know there's theories that man controls the weather and that type of thing. And I think that's probably true to some extent. But at some point, you can't take God out of the equation on all of these things. And because we know in Revelation and as we get closer and closer to the end, there will be these times of pestilence, weather, excessive heat, that sort of thing. And those will be God-caused things. And I think if we're creating the narrative now that, man's doing it, man can correct it, no problem, then we kind of take God out of the equation, and I don't think that's dangerous. Go read Isaiah chapter 24. So this was a large part of my talk yesterday, was this, and I talk about it every week. Transgender, drag queen story hour, that type of thing. You can see, I saw a video about some of the things, and I've talked about this, that they're teaching kids, young children, sometimes 4 or 5 years old, about sexuality in schools in California. And my conclusion was, you can't leave your kids in the school anymore. I don't know how you can do that unless you're monitoring it very, very closely. In California, believe me, California is just the leading edge of the wave that's going to sweep over the rest of the country. This is an example. The mayor of Atlanta tweeted this: "We want to thank our friends at the Atlanta Hawks, an NBA team, the Atlanta Falcons, Whole Foods, Georgia Beverage, and Atlanta Pride for partnering with us for Drag Queen Story Hour." So the NBA and the NFL is into this. So not only are players taking a knee at the national anthem, the teams are supporting things like Drag Queen Story Hour. I sometimes lose my mind. Here's a thing from the College Fix. Gender studies professor. Women who believe men can't become women are like white supremacists. Now, again, when you see this, you have to ask, okay, where did you get your PhD? It's insanity. I don't even know what to say about it. One of them says that these women, known by the slur trans exclusionary radical feminists, so in other words, there's a dispute between the transgender activist and the radical feminists, because the radical feminists are saying, wait a minute, you're sending men into women's sports and you're acting against women. So it's kind of a an inner, the leftist family is kind of tearing itself apart in this kind of incestuous craziness fight over who gets to be the ultimate victim, the claimed victim status. And so it's kind of interesting to watch them tearing themselves apart over that. And I just was like, let them, encourage them to argue about it. Here's another article. I'm leaving academic philosophy because of its transphobia problem. I'm a trans woman and a philosophy grad student, and I've decided to leave the discipline and seek a non-academic job because of transphobia in the academy. I've been a participant in academic philosophy for many years. I presented at conferences. And she goes on to say, I've not chosen to quit philosophy because I have fallen out of love with the work or I want something else to do with my life. I'm leaving academically only because of trans exclusionary radical feminists, so-called gender critical feminists, and those who amplify their voices. In other words, I'm more of a victim than they are. But the most troubling story I think I saw this week was this story from the Federalist. 21,460 attend library conference featuring workshops on drag queens and queering elementary schools. The article says this: the world's largest library association's annual conference this year featured more than, what do you think the number is? 5, 10, 20, 30, 100 workshops, more than 100 workshops with an equity, diversity, and inclusion theme, according to the American Library Association's conference catalog. And I downloaded that thing and read through it, and it's true. That included workshops with these titles: Creating Queer Inclusive Elementary School Library Programming. Next title, Developing an Online Face for a Lesbian Pulp Fiction Collection. Telling Stories, Expanding Boundaries, Drag Queen Story Times in Libraries. And if you look here on the right side of the slide, I'll change the slide here. They have a scholarship program. And the scholarship program, under eligibility there, it says, to be eligible for a Spectrum scholarship, you should be a citizen or permanent resident of the U.S. or Canada. Now, I think that's very exclusionary and discriminatory in itself. Don't they know that we should have open borders? So they even get a bad mark for that. Within that, the librarian always, shh, you shouldn't have done that. Don't say that. And then here, identify as an American Indian, Alaska Native, Black African American. And by the way, Elizabeth Warren meets all of these qualifications because she said she did. Hispanic Latino, Middle Eastern / North African, and or Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander. So that's the Elizabeth Warren trifecta. If you're the Elizabeth Warren trifecta, you can get a scholarship to go to these things. Here's a picture of the immediate past president of the ALA. Happy Pride, sharing pics from ALA 19, Wear the Rainbow Friday, and moments with the former president. Here's a conference, and there's no sound of this video, guys. This is a conference that was presented. You can find a short clip of the video on YouTube at their channel. And this is a professor from Colorado State University, who I noted last week in my update, has been one of the universities that's come out with this like Bible as to how to refer to people. They, them, all that nonsense. And here's the trouble. Look at what the title of the seminar is. Subversive Activism, Creating Social Change Through Libraries, Children's Literature, and Art. Now, what do you think they're trying to do through the libraries? This is the association where librarians go to learn what to do. And what they're doing is they are taking this on, and this is very troubling. In fact, if you look at the promotional video for the ALA conference, this is a screenshot from it. Libraries transform. Now, I thought they informed. I used to love to go to the library, check out all the books, old magazines, old newspapers, all of that stuff. Libraries transform. This is intentional. They're trying to change things. They're trying to break down barriers. They've been taken over by a progressive, radical leftist agenda. And they're trying to tear down moral fabric of society. The libraries. And look at and this is why I don't think it's intentional. Look at the O in transform. That's the classic serpent eating its tail. I'm not making it. You can find it in the promo video about halfway through. That's why I always show you pictures of this stuff, so you can't say, you're just making that up. No, that's why I call this update real stuff, because this is really happening. And it follows the progression of what we read in 1 Timothy 4, 2 Timothy 4, Romans 1, and it's the state of the world prior to the time that the Lord comes. And I think this is the biggest harbinger, if you will, of the end times, that deception is rampant. Here's another one: discord in the community, preparing for controversial speakers and programs. In this, they said, everyone needs to be seen and represented in the library, and we can't let one group who disagrees with another group prevent you from performing your duties as librarians in general. Let me interpret what he means when he says this. You Christians stay out of it. We don't want to hear what you have to say. That's what the Daily Beast said about Mariano Rivera. It's what you see all the time. There's actually a website called Drag Queen Story Hour. Now, as disgusting as it is, I'm appreciative of the fact that they clearly lay out their agenda. So, and what it says below, what is Drag Queen Story Hour? Here are some quotes from that. Drag Queen Story Hour captures the imagination and play of the gender fluidity of childhood and gives kids glamorous, positive, and unabashedly queer role models. You see that? This is their own words. Unabashedly queer role models. That's what's behind all of this. It's grooming. This is called grooming. In spaces like this, kids are able to see people who defy rigid gender restrictions and imagine a world where people can present as they wish, where dress up is real. This is really happening. This is an article out of the Daily Mail this week. Parents push children to swap gender, warns clinic. Now, if we had a parent who was making their child ill, it's called Munchausen, proxy by Munchausen. And it's a real thing. People will make their child ill so that they can get sympathy and that sort of thing and get the attention of doctors. Now, that is called, universally, that's a bad thing in child abuse. Why is this not being referred to all over the place as child abuse? I don't know. So this is a real thing. it infects the church. And let me see. I'm going to have to switch over to a different, I forgot to pull this into my presentation. So let me just open another one here. Oops. I apologize for this. And I talked about this yesterday at the conference. And I used the examples of the Revoice conference and that sort of thing, video clips that you've seen and how people are interpreting this. But this week, Josh Harris, he was a pastor at Sovereign Grace Church. When he was about 20, he wrote this book I Kissed Dating Goodbye. It was very popular. It led to a lot of what's known as the purity movement, saving yourself for marriage, that type of thing. He eventually got married. This week, he took to his Instagram account. Now, a few years ago, he resigned from the church he was pastoring under the Sovereign Grace umbrella in Maryland, and he went to Regent College in Vancouver. I think there's a direct connection between what's happened and going to Regent College. So he and his wife, this is a picture of her, they announced this week they're separating and divorcing. We're going through significant events and that type of thing. So he goes on to talk, my heart is full of gratitude. I wish you could see all the messages people sent me after the announcement of my divorce. I am learning that no group has the market cornered on grace. This week I've received grace from Christians, atheists, evangelicals, ex-evangelicals, straight people, LGBTQ people, and everyone in between. Of course, there have also been strong words of rebuke from religious people. While not always pleasant, I know they are seeking to love me. There have also been spiteful, hateful comments that angered and hurt me. He goes on to say this, the information that was left out of our announcement is that I have undergone a massive shift in regard to my faith in Jesus. The popular phrase for this is deconstruction. The biblical phrase is falling away. By all measurements that I have for defining a Christian, I am not a Christian. Many people tell me that there is a different way to practice faith, and I want to remain open to this, but I'm not there now. Martin Luther said that the entire life of believers should be repentance. There's beauty in that sentiment, regardless of your view of God. I have lived in repentance for the past several years, repenting of my self-righteousness, my fear-based approach to life, the teaching of this sounds like he's got a PhD coming. I hate to say that, from a Christian college, by the way. Then he goes this, but I specifically want to add this to this list now. To the LGBTQ plus community, I want to say that I'm sorry for the views that I taught in my books and as a pastor regarding sexuality. I regret not standing against marriage equality, for not affirming you and your place in the church, and for any ways that my writing and speaking contributed to the culture of exclusion and bigotry. I hope you can forgive me. So, this will lead to a debate. Was Josh Harris ever saved? And the answer is, or did he fall away from the faith? And some will say, well, he could never say this and have been saved at any point. And others will say, well, yeah, he was saved. He chose to walk away from the faith. And we see these passages about falling away and that sort of thing. Listen, despite the debate, we all agree. Right now, he needs to get saved. And this is troubling. He will wreck the faith of hundreds of people, I'm afraid, at least at a minimum, because he was very influential. He's pulled all of his books off the market that talked about sexual purity and that sort of thing, and repented of that. And he's come out full support of the LGBTQ plus community and same-sex marriage. So his descent, I guess, is complete. So let's take a look at some of the other things. This is kind of an interesting conference that's coming up in Washington, D.C. And I guess it happened, what's today? It happened last week. The inaugural Muslim Caucus Education Collective, Muslim Collective for Equitable Democracy Conference and Presidential Forum. Keynote speakers, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Keith Ellison, Bashir Jones, and others. So we have a Muslim caucus in our government now. Just to inform you. This is a big article in the Wall Street Journal, A Prince's $500 billion Dream in the Desert. This is about the city of Neom. This announcement first came out a little bit over a year ago. They want to push this. It's located in the place at the north end of the Red Sea where Saudi Arabia meets Jordan, and then they're going to build a bridge over to Egypt. Not too far from Eilat, which is in Israel. Spending $500 billion, major economic development. It's kind of a wild, this is what the Neom looks like today. It's a starkly beautiful area, but there's not really a lot there. It's probably, by the way, my personal view is it's probably in the area of, within that area where they're building this is the real Mount Sinai. I know that's a little bit controversial, but I think that there's good cases being made that that's where the real Mount Sinai is. And so for that result, depending on how they build this and what happens, it could have very big prophetic significance. So that's Neom, big announcements. We're moving forward with that project. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is, of course, the usual nonsense that goes on at the UN. At the UN Security Council earlier this week, there was a meeting, and it was about Israel and the situation in the Middle East. I'm going to play you clips from two speakers. The first is Danny Danon, who essentially said, Port of Beirut, Lebanon is now the port of Hezbollah. And here's what Ambassador Danon had to say to that.
With every passing day of Hezbollah's growing entrenchment, it becomes harder and harder to tell where Beirut ends and Tehran begins. Resolution 1701 calls for, and I quote, no sales or supply of arms and related material to Lebanon except as authorized by its government. It appears, however, that this call for an embargo has been completely ignored. The Iranian regime is transferring weapons in various ways, and you can see it here. The Quds force exploits civilian airports in Damascus and Beirut, civilian airports, as well as civilian land infrastructure and the Syria-Lebanon border to smuggle weapons, dual-use items, and other capabilities. But today, I present new evidence. In the years 2018 and 2019, Israel found that Iran and the Quds force have begun to advance the exploitation of the civilian maritime channels and specifically the port of Beirut for this same purpose, a civilian port. The port of Beirut is now the port of Hezbollah.
Now, another person spoke, and it was Jason Greenblatt, who's on the president's team. Here's some of his comments that he made.
This conflict will also not be resolved by constantly referencing the hundreds of UN resolutions on the issue. The constant reference to these heavily negotiated, purposely ambiguously worded resolutions is nothing more than a cloak to avoid substantive debate about the realities on the ground and the complexity of the conflict. The interpretation of one of the most often cited resolutions, Resolution 242, has been hotly debated over the past half-century. That debate has not brought us closer to a lasting and comprehensive peace. That debate has not even bridged the gap between those who construe Resolution 242 to call for the so-called right of return and compensation for displaced Palestinians, and the fact that the world covers its eyes to the fate of the roughly equal number of Jews who were expelled or forced to flee their homes in Arab countries in connection with Israel's War of Independence. Resolution 242 and others may have been drafted and voted upon in a genuine attempt to bring an end to the suffering that all involved in this conflict had endured, but we must acknowledge they have not succeeded. A comprehensive and lasting peace will not be created by fiat of international law or by these heavily wordsmithed, unclear resolutions.
He then went on to talk a little bit about the status of Jerusalem. And this is a correction, by the way, from the New York Times in September 2000, where they said 242 requires Israel to withdraw from the territories. Even the New York Times, back in 2000, September 8th, 2000, said, that's not really what 242 says. We said that in our article yesterday, and that was incorrect. So they corrected it. Some newspapers refuse to correct statements like that, including Haaretz, which is an Israeli newspaper. They make this claim all the time, but it's just not true. That's not what 242 says. You can look it up. It's readily available on the internet. Here he is talking about Jerusalem. Back this up, and here we go.
The same holds true for the status of Jerusalem. There is no international consensus about Jerusalem, and no international consensus or interpretation of international law will persuade the United States or Israel that a city in which Jews have lived and worshipped for nearly 3,000 years and has been the capital of the Jewish state for 70 years is not today and forever the capital of Israel. Jerusalem is a city of three world faiths. The rights of all who wish to worship at the holy sites in the city of Jerusalem must be protected. It is true that the PLO and the Palestinian Authority continue to assert that East Jerusalem must be a capital for the Palestinians. But let's remember, an aspiration is not a right. Please do not read into that statement anything about the content of the political portion of the plan. I am simply making a statement of fact. Aspirations belong at the negotiating table, and only direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians can resolve the issue of Jerusalem if it can be resolved. It will not be resolved in this chamber, in this institution, or in any other capital around the world.
And then he goes on. Now there was a conference, Economic and Social Council conference at the UN this week, and they had a vote. And I'll show you pictures of that in just a moment. There was a resolution about Israeli treatment of Palestinian women, and I think Nikki Haley and her Twitter comment about what went on at this council earlier this week is true. It amazes me how the UN condones votes like these. It is a total mockery of human rights to allow Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, and Yemen to name Israel as the world's only violator of women's rights. It is insane. Now, the conference started out with Norway and 6 EU countries voted at the UN in favor of 2 resolutions that singled out Israel for criticism as a violator of women's and human rights. Israel was the only country named as a violator or trouble spot by the 54-nation UN Economic and Social Council during the session, according to the UN Watch organization. The video starts off, no sound at the beginning on this, but it's kind of ironic that one of the countries that was criticizing Israel for the way it treats Palestinians was the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. And then the floor was turned over to Israel. You can turn up the sound
And
now.
I now give the floor to Israel.
Thank you, Madam President. It is regrettable that we are yet again taking part in this annual UN ritual. The report we are considering brings nothing new and especially nothing constructive to the discussion. It is intended solely to hide critical facts, real on-the-ground facts, from anyone who has bothered to read the report. The deep flaws of this report, the facts omitted, the complete lack of context, and the hearsay accusations are embarrassment and a liability to the UN. The problem with the report is with what's in the report, but also with what's not in the report. The report paints the so-called Great March of Return as a large-scale picnic of Palestinian families on the border with Israel. Of course, it doesn't mention that it was in fact nothing more than the deliberate creation of a wall of human shields behind which terrorists fired guns into Israel, threw Molotov cocktails, and launched flammable kites to burn Israeli fields. Don't take my word for this. Take the word of senior Hamas officials. Mahmoud Azar, the co-founder of Hamas, admitted in an interview, when we talk about peaceful resistance, we are deceiving the public. Hamas spokesperson Salah Badawil admitted that the vast majority of Palestinian casualties were in fact Hamas terrorists. And just 10 days ago, Hamas political bureau member Fathi Hamed urged Palestinians to kill Jews all over the world. We would like to point out to the major donors to the UN system that the resources, their taxpayers' hard-earned wages, are being used to fund what is, by this terrorist organization own admission, lies. Now let's talk about what is not in the report. Since the release of the 2018 ESCO report, more than 600 rockets have been fired into Israel from Gaza. We searched the current report in vain for this reference. Actually, the word rocket does not appear even once. To the states listening to this debate, I would like to pose a question. If there were hundreds of rockets fired into your country, would you accept a report that somehow overlooked this fact? Welcome to the alternative universe of the UN, where this is standard procedure. The harm, Madam President, of the extreme bias of this report is that it encourages the use of Palestinian civilians as human shields. It encourages terrorists to fire more rockets into Israeli villages, towns and cities. And it sends the message that political points are a higher priority than the well-being of all sides. Our collective silence on this bias today in this room encourages more reports such as this. Clearly, the basic approach of ESCWA will only prolong this abuse and neglect of Palestinian citizens by their own leadership. But again, this is deliberate. The report and this meeting are calculated to distract from the incompetence, mass corruption, and lack of vision of the Palestinian leadership. Madam President, every time Israel has engaged constructively with its neighbors, it has built better and stronger, more stable relations. Sometimes we've had to overcome decades of mistrust, but it has been done. History shows this to be true. I urge my Palestinian colleagues to look at history differently, to see not what can be prevented, but what is possible to create.
And so they had the vote, and the results of the vote were that there were only 2 votes against, 40 in favor, and 9 abstentions. Here is just a very short clip of what the representative of the United Kingdom had to say in response to the vote.
The United Kingdom fully supports the messages in the resolution emphasising the vital role of women in peace building and conflict prevention, and the importance of efforts to end violence and discrimination and ensure the safety and meaningful participation of women and girls everywhere, including in the occupied Palestinian territories. The resolution reaffirms that the Israeli occupation remains a major obstacle for Palestinian women and girls.
Well, that's enough of
The United Kingdom.
Another announcement this week, the U.S. is going to hold a security conference. And again, they always call these things peace and security, peace to prosperity, that type of thing. And this is going to take place in Bahrain in the next month or two about naval security. And it's appropriate to have it in a Persian Gulf country like Bahrain because of the problems that are going on. Now, the Palestinians came out this week and they said, Mahmoud Abbas said, we're withdrawing from all agreements with Israel. We have security cooperation agreements. We're done with them. Everything's over. And so Haaretz and Jerusalem Post this morning have these headlines below the fold. Palestinians doubt that the Palestinian Authority, will halt Israeli agreements. Why is that? Because at the Palestinian Authority has these agreements with Israel so it can stay in power, because they're always concerned about Hamas and Islamic Jihad. And 70% of the rest of those people are taken out in the area known as the West Bank by the Palestinian Authority in cooperation with security forces of Israel. So just keep that in mind. And then this was a find this week. A lost 3,000-year-old Philistine city of Gath has been found. In fact, what they found is they had found a lair that was about 100 years after the time of Goliath, during the reign of King David. They went down another layer, and what did they find? They found an even more magnificent city of Gath that was existent at the time of King David. So that's very interesting. These are some reports. This is a report from Arab Press and some translations of it. It's from Al Jarida, which is a Kuwaiti newspaper. Sometimes a little bit quick to pull the trigger, but what they're saying is what you need to understand is there's a tension developing between Iran and Russia. And so what the Iranians are now saying is that, well, Russia must be giving the codes from the S-300 defense systems to Israel so they can fly all over the Middle East and we can't even detect them. You know, so you see these fissures developing between Russia and Iran, and they're sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle, but you just need to know that this is going on. And we always talk about this coalition, Ezekiel 38, 39. It's always, in my view, a loose coalition. It's sort of a shotgun wedding, marriage of convenience type thing when it happens. Russia's not necessarily, in some respects, is a reluctant participant. So this, by the way, is a map in Rashida Tlaib's office. Now, she didn't put the sticky note on. Somebody else posted that and took a picture of it, so I can't blame her for that. But you need to know that Iran has a lot of what we would call sort of iffy relationships with other countries. The countries in blue are the countries that Iran actually has they would be considered allies. That would be part of Yemen, Iraq, and Syria. They have diplomatic relations with Egypt and Oman and Qatar. And that Qatar's understandable because they share this massive gas field in the Persian Gulf, one of the most richest. And then this was a graphic from Geopolitical Future, George Friedman's group, about all the things that have gone on in the Persian Gulf. The problem is Iran is kind of rapidly reaching a point where they're not, at least to Western countries, are not as reliant on Middle East oil as they used to be. So that's causing a lot of economic problems. This is a report from the Twitter thing from the IDF, sort of backing up what Ambassador Danan had to say in his talk. I won't go into this in detail, but Seth Frantzman, again, has another good article in the Jerusalem Post on Friday. The West's lack of strategy aids Tehran's aims. And Tehran views the fact that, look, you don't respond, you're weak. And so when we don't respond, it only emboldens Tehran to do something else. And so Tehran have a strategy. They have a thought out strategy. And unfortunately, I think sometimes our diplomats, we don't agree on things and things that don't get done. Now, there's a lot of tension still going on in Syria. In the north part of Syria and the left, in the blue area, that's Turkish controlled. That's up around Idlib. And Turkey and Syria and Russia are they're having problems with the rebels there. A lot of them were transported from Daraa in the south all the way up there to kind of put them in a place where they're not used to being. But now you have a city that has a lot of bad people in it, from almost anybody's estimation. And Syria has to figure out how to deal with that. So there's bombings, there's civilians, sometimes a few hundred civilians being killed in these raids and stuff every day. And Turkey wants to come down and control the area because they don't want any more refugees. They've already got 3.5 million. They're rounding up refugees in Istanbul, Syrian refugees, to get rid of them because the belief in Turkish society is this is why our economy is bad. All these refugees are here and not being productive. In the northeast part of the country, which is the Kurdish area, east of the Euphrates River, it's that orange area, the United States and Turkey are having a bit of conflict. In fact, there was a big article in the Arab News yesterday out of Saudi Arabia about Turkey saying, we have no patience left. There were also reports this week, rumors, that Erdogan had had a heart attack and died. So I was able to pull this off a Turkish site from the other day. I don't think he's dead. The rumors of his death have been greatly exaggerated in my view. But we'll watch and see what happens. But I think he's probably still hanging in there. Now, this raises a thing, and I'll try to close with this today. There have been a number of books over the years, America Alone, David Goldman's How Civilizations Die, and Douglas Murray's The Strange Death of Europe. And all of them look at the problem, the worldwide problem of demographics. And when you look at articles, what you see in these articles is nothing like this has happened in human history. Now, this is another one of these convergence things that are happening right now that I think a lot of people miss. I've mentioned before that in India and China, because of one-child policy in China and favoring male babies in India, that there are in the tens of millions of marriage-age males, not males all across the board. I would call them marriage-age and military-age males that have no hope of a marriage partner in their society and culture. This has never happened before. In fact, from one of the articles I read, it says this: our village has 50 or 60 bachelors and only 1 or 2 single women. For men who are 40 or even older, Cambodian women are like a second chance. This is a problem, and that those numbers I've seen are 80 million, 100 million, 110 million, and they're on track to reach 200 million or more in very short order. This is unprecedented. This has a huge impact. And so does graphics. Hoover Institution had a thing about how will demographic transformations affect democracy in the coming decades. And the one point they made, the advanced industrial democracies are experiencing a demographic implosion, an historically unprecedented decline. And again, here you see the term again, unprecedented decline in fertility rates, leading to rapidly aging populations and shrinking labor forces. At the same time, some portions of the developing world, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, but also parts of the Middle East, South Asia, and Central America, are still experiencing very high population rates. Foreign Affairs had a very long article on it in their in the current issue of Foreign Affairs, called "With Great Demographics Comes Great Power." Let me just share a little bit of some of the points from there. To be a great power, you have to have people. You have to have the right kind of people. You have to have the right age of people. And the United States has been blessed with a relatively good distribution. We have the highest fertility rates in the Western world. We're about the only one that's still above replacement rates. And so as they look down the road, and I'm not saying that there's not something that's going to happen to the United States or anything like that, most of the analyses that are done on this particular topic say the United States, come 2100, will still be in pretty much the same position that it is now. Now, don't take that to mean that, John Haller thinks it's going to be till 2100 before things start to wrap up. That's not what I think. But what I think is that the demographic pressures that are affecting cultures and societies may make some of these end-time players take action before they reach the point of no return. For example, I mentioned a couple weeks ago, David Goldman had some articles from a couple years ago. He's the one who wrote How Civilizations Die. And he said, Iran is the most rapidly aging country on the planet. So if Iran's going to make a move, I think that there's a time window that they have to operate in while they have enough men to put into an army, a military force. Now, that can be altered some by technology and drones and all of that stuff. But still, to occupy a place or take over a place, you're going to have to use ground troops unless somebody comes up with a way to just control everybody. Oh, wait a minute. They're kind of doing that already. So, but one of the interesting things is the study of Africa. Currently 1.2 billion. By 2050, that population will double. By 2100, they're said to have 4.4 billion people. 1/3 of the entire human race in 2100 will be African. Most countries in Africa will triple in population. Look at Nigeria alone. It's a country about the size of Texas. In 2012, it was predicted by 2100 there would be 914 million. That's been reduced downward to 760 million. It's not like 154 million people went away. It's just that fertility rates change, and the UN projects these things all the time, and they actually do a pretty good job and watch it. But by 2100, the population of Nigeria alone, just Nigeria, will exceed the population of all 48 countries in Europe by over 100 million people. That's a big difference. Its growth alone between now and then will exceed the EU population combined of all 48 countries. Look at this list of largest cities projected in 2030. Tokyo, Delhi, Shanghai, Mumbai, Beijing, Dhaka, Bangladesh. Now go forward 70 years. What do those numbers look like? Dhaka, which is down there at number 6, it falls to number 8, but it still doubles in size. A town, how many of you have heard of Niamey, Niger? It's probably a town of, I don't know what its population is now, but by 2100, they say 56 million. Look at Kinshasa in Congo, 83.5 million people in one town, city. Lagos, 88 million people. Today, it's about, I think it's 12 or 14 million. It's going to explode. Now, these things can be adjusted by fertility and life expectancy and that type of thing. But, for example, in China, China, the big economic miracle, between now and 2040, the number of Chinese over the age of 65 is projected to rise from about 135 million to 325 million, 200 more million retirees. Retirees don't generally have babies. They don't generally work and produce taxes. They don't even buy as much stuff. Most people, you get to 65, you're trying to get rid of it. They're in their companies. We know I'm at that age, and there are companies, I get ads from them all the time. Downsize your house. We'll help you downsize. We'll take your stuff and move it someplace else. Japan, for many years now, has had 1,000 more deaths per day than births. That's not a population that's increasing. And you see on that list, 2030, Tokyo is the largest city in the world. 2100, it's not there. In fact, if you look at the top 100 cities projected in 2100, you won't find any in Europe. You'll find one or two in America. The numbers are staggering. Here's sort of a projection of world population in the biggest countries in 2100. Russia, which is 23rd, will be 23rd then, but they will have a decline from 143 million to 102 million people. Other countries will have similar declines. The U.S. goes up by quite a bit. The countries in Africa, but you can see Nigeria projected to go up by 740 million people. Congo to go up by 195 million. And they'll have one town, one city that'll have over half of that population. Uganda goes up by 167 million people. That's half the population of the United States currently. These numbers are staggering. And it shows a world that's really rapidly changing. China goes down by 300 million because of its aging and one-child policies. The population pyramids, usually it was a bell, then it's turned into, it's really by 20, it turns into a beehive. You have a pretty even distribution, and you have more old people than young people, and that's not a good thing. Here is India's population will kind of do the same thing eventually. Europe is in major decline. So these demographic things, I think, are very important to keep in mind, that they have an impact on what I commonly refer to as the logistics of Bible prophecy. There are things that are coming, and all of these things that we look at, the cultural decline, the attack on sexual mores, the attack on Christians, the isolation of the Jewish state of Israel, the weather, the demographics, all of these things fall into that category of this is unprecedented. We live in unprecedented times. And so I would close with this verse. It's a troubling time. It is. I mean, I look at stuff and I don't know how much longer I'm going to be around. Statistically, I don't know. Could be, I have no guarantee of my exit date. It would make retirement planning much easier if I knew the exact date that I was out of here. Because if it's real short, then I'd be out there, golfing every day. I heard somebody say that. Amen to that, sister. And, but we don't know this. But at the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, there's a verse. And that verse is it's always been a favorite verse of mine since I first learned it at age 15. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. That's what's really important. That's what we need to be focused on. So take all of these things as things that ought to make us get into the Word, dedicate ourselves to the Lord, and know that while we may not see it, or anything we do for the Lord is not in vain. Let's pray. Father, pray that you'll bless us this week, give us opportunities to share the gospel with people, to let them know that their only hope of salvation is by faith, by grace, through faith in Jesus Christ, who came to earth, born of a virgin, lived a sinless life, died on a cross on our behalf, rose again, ascended to heaven, and will return someday to set up his kingdom. Let us look forward to that day with great hope and anticipation and labor towards that end. In Jesus' name, amen.